We love the UFC, but we know there are things that the promotion could be doing to make the product a lot better, to get new fans and reignite the fan base. And that's what I'm going to talk about in today's video, because I have 5 things I think the UFC could do to make their product so much better. First and foremost, UFC is doing too many events. This is something that has happened over the last couple of years. It seems like they care more about putting cards on than quality of fights. And I'll give you a quick example here. So at the time we're recording this, we've actually got a really good fight night card coming up here between Ian Machado Gary and Carlos Prates. One of the better events out here. You see some of the names on this card. This looks like a solid fight night card, but let's be honest, how many times have we been watching a fight night card and we've said to ourselves, I'm probably just going to record this event and not watch it live. That's happened far too often. And you look at the fight night events that are taking place after. I'm going to use 3 of them here. Gilbert Burns and Michael Morales card, great main event, but the card after that, taking a little bit of a hit here, honestly. The next card after that, we've got Aaron Blanchfield and Macy Barber. Love that fight. Big implications for the flyweight division. But again, if you go down the card right now, and I know they're going to add some more fights, it's got some work to do. Atlanta. That's certainly going to get a better event. I know they're going to add more fights to this card as well, but as it stands right now, you've got Rose Namajunas and Miranda Maverick. Again, another good fight in the flyweight division. But after that, not a lot of big fights or any big implications for that event. Look at how this event would look if they combined the events as opposed to adding all the extra fights on here. You could go with the main event of Aaron Blanchfield and Macy Barber. I think that's the most important fight out of all those fights we talked about in terms of their specific division. Don't have an issue with that headlining the card. If you really didn't want that as the main event, you could do Gilbert Burns and Michael Morales as the main event. I'd be fine by that. Passing of the guard fight, so to speak. You got the up-and-comer Morales against Gilbert Burns. You've got Rose Namajunas, Miranda Maverick, Oban Elliott versus Ramiz, and Alonzo Menafield versus C. So right there, that main card, a solid fight night main card. Again, we're not talking pay-per-view here, but I think fight night cards back in the day, they used to look like this. On the prelims, Ketlin Vieira, Macy Sasson, Cody Brundage, Mansour Abdul Malik, Paul Craig and Bellato, Dustin Jacoby and Lopez, Edmund Shabazi and Andre Petrosky, Ruziabov and Dustin Solfis. Who's complaining about this card top to bottom? 11 fights. They could even add another fight or two over the next couple events. That is the type of fight night card that people would watch live and not be like, I can just watch this later, because that's one thing the UFC I think has done far too often, is not care about the quality of their events. So that's just one example I brought up here. We could go through a bunch of other examples too when it comes to looking at some of the UFC fight night cards we've had, but this looks like a fight night card you would have had a couple years ago, and we just haven't seen that often enough. At the time I'm recording this, we do not have a UFC event coming up this weekend, and this has actually been really good timing because everyone this week has been talking about all the great things that happened at UFC 314. Volkanovski beating Lopez, getting his title back. One of the few fighters who's over 36 or 36 and over, I should say, to get his title back. Paddy Pimblett became a huge star by beating Michael Chandler. You got the John Silva finishing Bryce Mitchell. Everyone's talking about it this week because we don't have a UFC event. I feel far too often we're already moving on to the next event and we're forgetting all the great things that happened on the last pay-per-view. This is another reason why I think the UFC should do less events, because it gives more of a spotlight to the events we've just witnessed as opposed to focusing on the next thing. Another benefit of doing less events as well is that you're not scrambling to put fights together at the last minute, because the UFC has already made their cards that much stronger. I just showed you that fight night card. You can make the pay-per-views a lot better too. Let's go back to UFC 311. It was supposed to be Islam Makhachev and Arman Tsarukyan. If you had a number of really good fights on that card, you don't need to have Islam fight Renato Moicano at the last second. He was a huge favorite in the fight, minus 950. He finishes Moicano in a minute. We didn't really learn anything from this fight other than the fact that Islam Makhachev's a badass and will fight anyone, anytime, anywhere. But this fight really didn't do anything for anyone, and you killed this win streak that Renato Moicano had by putting this fight together at the last minute. And it isn't just this fight. We also had a fight at UFC 313 between Justin Gaethje and Rafael Fiziev. If you remember, Dan Hooker was supposed to get that fight. He's out. Gaethje needs to fight someone. He wants to keep active. They had to give him Rafael Fiziev, which ended up being a great fight, but Rafael Fiziev already lost to Justin Gaethje not that long ago. So was it really needed to do the rematch right now? I don't think so. If you're beefing up these cards, you're not scrambling as much to put fights together. And who's to say Gaethje couldn't just fight a couple weeks later against another opponent and have more of a camp for both fighters to have that matchup? To me, I see it far too often where the UFC is putting together short notice fights, and it's really impacting the careers of certain fighters. Look at a Fiziev right now. He's coming off a couple losses now because he took the short notice opportunity, and that's why he's talking about moving down to featherweight, because right now he's not looking too great at lightweight. I think the UFC does does this far too often, where they're putting together fights at the last minute because they're trying to keep this pace going of so many events, and it's very hard to maintain. The second thing that I think would make the UFC a lot better is if they got rid of the Ultimate Fighter. Look, this is what got me into watching MMA, was the first season of the Ultimate Fighter. You look at some of the names on here, a lot of these fighters went on to have great careers. One of the reasons the Ultimate Fighter worked so well was that you really were seeing some of the best fighters on the regional circuit compete on this show for a contract. And now, with the fact that we have so many streaming platforms, including UFC Fight Pass, Spectation Sports, you can watch regional MMA pretty much any weekend you want. You can watch the best talent already. You don't need to watch it on a reality show. So a lot of times now when they're casting for the Ultimate Fighter, you're not necessarily getting the best fighters. They're trying to get personalities and some fighters that sort of fit that mold of what would be good for reality TV. And honestly, I've talked to multiple fighters about this. A lot of fighters would rather go on Dana White's Contender Series than go on the Ultimate Fighter. What would be better for the fighter? If you're spending a month or two in a situation where you can't check your phone, you're away from your family, and you're having to live with a bunch of guys and compete for a contract over a month, or take one fight on Dana White's Contender Series and get the exact same goal. There was no Dana White's Contender Series when the Ultimate Fighter started, so really this was a good way to get a contract, but now it's much easier to get a contract if you're just going on Dana White's Contender Series or just fighting for bigger regional promotions like LFA or CFFC. That's your ticket to the UFC. So a lot of fighters don't even want to go on the show right now. It's definitely lost its luster. The third way that you can improve the UFC's product is by making the Dana White's Contender Series show year-round. I don't know why they only do it at certain parts of the year, but I can tell you that there's certain fighters that can't compete on the show because they have fights already booked or they have to wait for an opportunity to come up. If you have the Dana White's Contender Series going year round, fighters are not having to, fulfill fights that they already have booked, or it just opens up the pool a lot more to other prospects getting on the show. And this is something that you could put in place of the UFC on Saturday nights instead of doing events every single week. I showed you that super card earlier. Instead of having that card and then another fight night card the week after, put on Contender Series the week after and people can watch the Contender Series year round. This is something I don't understand why they don't do. If you look at some of the dates here, it's usually in the fall or sometimes in the summer when they put these events on. If they did it year round, I think people would be very happy. I haven't heard a single person complain about the Contender Series. It's a great show, great format. Why not make this year round? And they're already going to the Apex enough with their fight night cards. Why not put the Contender Series on there, which really the Apex should be built for? I can tell you a number of fans and a number of people that watch this sport that don't enjoy watching cards at the Apex. They would rather see it in an actual market. And this is where Contender Series could give the UFC that opportunity to have those events at the Apex, because that's what it is. It's like you haven't made it to the UFC yet. You're going to fight in front of a smaller crowd and in a smaller venue. I think the Contender Series being year round would be a great idea. And also this would give more opportunities to fighters that are looking to get on the show that maybe the timing didn't work out right. So UFC, if you're watching, Contender Series year round, I think would be a great idea. The fourth point I think could really improve the UFC's product is if they did a reality show similar to what we saw on Netflix with Full Swing. The UFC actually did a show similar to this, not involving the fighters, but involving the promotion called Fight Inc. If you remember, it came out last year. It was a phenomenal show. I really enjoyed it. The UFC ultimately decided not to continue with it because they felt it was too invasive, but why not get some of the fighters involved with a show like this? One of the successes of Full Swing with being on a huge platform like Netflix is that everyone was able to see these golf personalities in a different light, in more of a personal role. And I think that's something that you could easily do with the UFC fighters. I interview UFC fighters all the time. There's some great personalities, some really interesting people. Imagine someone like Merab Dvalishvili having a camera crew follow him around for a couple months and people getting to see the highs and lows of a fighter throughout their career. We get this already a little bit with Embedded, but the problem with Embedded is it's only during fight week and people kind of forget about it the week after. I think if you added some money here and put on a full-scale reality show like this where you followed the fighters around, it would not only create new superstars in the UFC because mainstream fans would be able to understand and relate to some of these fighters, but also it's a way to fill up programming, because I know the UFC, since they've been with ESPN, is all about content. This is a great piece of content that the average person could watch and still understand, because let's be honest, there's people out there that will never watch MMA because they think it's too violent. Why not show them a softer side of it and show the fighters behind the scenes? I think this would be an absolute slam dunk idea, and get different fighters for each episode and each season so people can follow along. There's so many fighters on the roster that don't get enough exposure. I think this this would be the way to go, is to get a camera crew to follow them around and have sort of a full swing type reality series for the UFC. And this is something, by the way, that you could air on a weekly basis in place of certain UFC cards if the UFC is hurting for content. And the fifth thing that I think the UFC could really change and make fans a lot happier is lowering the pay-per-view price, or at the very least offering a bundle package where you could pay for a yearly rate and get a discount on the pay-per-view. So I'm in Canada. You can see the pay-per-views are about $70 per event. The events are already going down in quality over the last couple of years. This is really expensive, and I think a lot of fans would be more into buying the pay-per-views if they offered some sort of discount for loyal fans. For example, if they offered a yearly rate and you got the pay-per-view at say $50 instead of $70, I think people would be a lot more into that. The UFC and Dana White in particular has been very much against people streaming fights. I know streaming's really easy and available here, but honestly, you would get more people at least considering buying pay-per-views if they made the prices a little bit better here. $70 for a pay-per-view, when a lot of these ones every now and then, like for example, we had UFC 312, which wasn't a great pay-per-view. Some of the pay-per-views just aren't worth the price of admission. We have UFC 315 coming up. It's a great event. Is it worth $70? I'd argue it probably isn't, even though you're getting the 2 title fights. It's not one of the stronger pay-per-views. Why should UFC 315 cost the exact same price as UFC 314 when UFC 314 was a much more stacked card than UFC 315 is? It doesn't make any sense, and at the very least, this would encourage some people to at least buy the pay-per-views legally, and it would give some incentive if the price point was a little bit lower. This is something that I think the UFC will never get off of, is the pay-per-view model. I know there's going to be people in the comments being like, just ditch the pay-per-views altogether, but I don't think they're ever going to get rid of it. So the compromise here is offer a yearly rate where you can get a discount on the pay-per-views as a whole, because I buy every pay-per-view. I know there's people out there that do the same thing. Why not get a discounted rate for being a loyal customer? I think that's something the UFC should seriously consider, along with beefing up their cards. So I want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. What do you think of the points I made here? I know there's people that want to watch MMA every single week, so that's why I mentioned that you could replace some of the UFC events with Dana White Contender Series events, or you could do this reality show idea I had. I think it satisfies everyone's needs, but you have to admit, everyone watching this video, there are some cards that you watch and you go, this is not something I'm going to dedicate all my time to. This is something I will watch either the next day, or I won't even watch at all. I do hear that from a lot of people. A lot of people not watching as many fights as they used to. I think this satisfies a lot of parties. And again, this video is just talking about the UFC product itself. I'm not talking about policy changes or things like weight cutting. I'm just talking about the viewing experience for the customer who is watching MMA over a number of years. I think they could do a better job at giving the customer a better experience overall. Follow me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, @Lynch on Sports, and let me know in the comments if there's anything you think the UFC could do to improve, or if you agree or disagree with some of the points I've made in this video. My name is James Lynch. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.